Andromeda first aired on the Sci-Fi Channel all the way back in 2000. The show would run for 5 consecutive seasons, and would air its final episode in 2005. I remember when the show first aired and there being a little bit of buzz around it, because this was the first big venture for lead actor Kevin Sorbo after his very successful run on Hercules: The Legendary Journeys. The other key point of interest was that this show was based on an idea from Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek. So there was a certain amount of anticipation within fan circles and with the science fiction fan community, but reactions to the show were mixed, to say the least. Certainly it found its audience fairly quickly and managed to hold on to them throughout its run, but it would never be the behemoth success of Star Trek. Part of that was due, of course, to the fact that this was a relatively low-budget TV show, and despite having a soft spot for it, I do have to admit that it is fairly uneven in terms of its quality, its storytelling, and its production values. Oftentimes, it feels like there's contrary forces at work trying to do very different things, very disparate things at the same time. And I feel like ultimately this compromises the show and the clear direction that it needed to take. That said, it does still have some standout moments and some interesting points throughout the series, which are well worth investing in. But I think if you're new to the show and you haven't seen it before, then it might be harder to swallow in 2021 than it was when it first hit screens in 2000. Certainly, I think if you're a fan of Kevin Sorbo, as I am, then there's enough here to keep you entertained and to help you stick around for the show's duration. And if you do that, then I think you will have some pleasant surprises along the way. Now, interestingly, the show is fairly consistent for its first 2 years, and then it takes a radical departure in the 3rd season. One of the lead producers, Robert Hewitt Wolfe, who had experience working on Star Trek, ultimately left the show due to creative differences behind the scenes, and there's a few major cast changes over the next couple of seasons as well, and there's a radical different feeling in each of the subsequent seasons, as it feels like it's trying to find a new direction, a new voice, and whilst this can lead to the show feeling a little bit inconsistent, I do think it offers opportunities to do something new and fresh each year. But interestingly, despite having a very healthy run of 5 years and over 100 episodes, it didn't really have a lot of merchandising support. When the show first launched, there were a few tie-ins, a few novels, handbooks and things like that, but there was only ever one toy line produced to run with the show, and that was this deluxe range of 12-inch action figures. This line would be very short-lived. It would just have the one wave of 4 characters, and it was produced by a company called Blue Box Toys, not one that I'm very familiar with, and I don't think I have any of the toys from them in my collection. So I thought today it would be fun to take a closer look at this line of figures, because I think it's a line that's been largely forgotten, and I thought it would be fun to see how these toys measure up. So first up, let's take a look at Captain Dylan Hunt, played of course by Kevin Sorbo, and here is the packaging. As you can see, this is a large window display, so we can see the figure there in all his glory, and at the bottom we have a band with, of course, the series logo and an image of the ship in the left-hand corner, which is pretty cool. Whilst behind the figure we have this inlay, this in tray here, which of course is made of card, and it's quite bright and colourful. It's meant to be the galaxy, I think, and it's nice and bright and colourful, and it really helps the figure stand out on display. The side panel of the packaging just has the 4 characters here. These are production shots from the show itself, and we can see all 4 characters in this series. They do seem rather stacked on top of each other, and I think this is because obviously the box art is exactly the same on all of the figures, and obviously save costs and coming up with individual artwork for each release. And on the reverse we can see the 4 figures here, nicely photographed, and behind them there is an image of the greyed out ship, the Andromeda there. So not overly exciting, but it's still fairly presentable. It's a shame they aren't more individual, because then they would be more displayable. As it is, they'd all feel a bit like a clone. Okay, and so out of the box, I think the presentation of this figure is pretty nice. There's something quite fun and attractive about the way this character looks, and I think they've done a nice job with the materials that they've used here, so it looks pretty fun. The one caveat I'd have though is that it doesn't look quite big enough. At the end of the day, Kevin Sorbo is quite a big guy. Obviously he was Hercules, quite a muscled fella. And this figure just looks a little bit too slimline. Now the head sculpt, I think they've done a pretty decent job with this, I have to say. definitely seems to have caught all Kevin Sorbo's features here. I think they've done a really nice job of bringing this to life. It still looks ever so slightly off, and I feel like that's the paint apps. I think the sculpt itself is pretty solid, but I feel like the paint apps just look a little bit too washed out, a little bit too pale there, so it doesn't quite look lifelike. He looks a little bit ill, perhaps. But other than that, you know, I have to say, I think this is pretty decent. Actually, this is very nicely done. I do really like the costume. I love all the little details that are on this costume, which is surprising in some places. I like the various textures that have been used. I like that there's different materials in this figure, and we can see also that this top is slightly padded. It's held by Velcro, and when you open it up, he has his polo shirt underneath, which is pretty cool. This is what he wears in the show, and they've done a nice job of this. And this feels like quite a nice quality material, and it looks pretty decent, to be fair. So I think they've done a very nice job. And there's little details such as the insignia on the top of his collar there, which is a separate piece that's been sewn in, nicely rendered, nicely painted. And all the various belts and buckles and bits and pieces are all nicely, neatly painted, and they look pretty solid. On each leg he has a holster, and this is held together by this rubber harness that he has. One of these holsters is closed, so you can't open it or do anything with it, but it's still nicely painted, looks good. On the flip side, we have another holster where he stores his weapon, which is removable, and I like how they've given him these extra gauntlets as well, which are a separate sort of faux leather piece, but which look really quite nice, and again just adds a little bit of a different texture. There's also a button on here which you can undo. It doesn't really seem to do anything, so I don't think it's really holding the gauntlet in place, but nevertheless it's a nice little detail that I think they've included there, and just rounds out the figure, just makes it a little bit more interesting. And on his left gauntlet, there's a unique piece that we can see that is sewn in there. Again, a plastic piece, which is meant to be his comm unit, which I think is, you know, again, really nice little touch. I think it's well done, and kind of subtle. It's not the kind of thing you would immediately notice, so I really appreciate him taking the time to do this. His boots are a single rubber piece, but again, there is a little bit of detailing. There's some paint there in terms of the buckles, and the strap work is nicely moulded. So I think this is a nice attempt and a pretty decent effort. Now, the articulation on this figure is really surprising for the time. Obviously, this was released around about 2000, and it's pretty fantastic, really. So, he has a ball-jointed neck, so of course he can look all the way around if you want him to, but he can also look up and down a really healthy distance there, which is fantastic. He's got ball-jointed shoulders, so his arms obviously kick up and out there, which is fantastic. They swivel around, which is brilliant, and he has incredibly double-jointed elbows, which is absolutely fantastic. So if you want, he can reach all the way to his head there, which is brilliant. And he also has a pin swivel at the wrist, meaning of course that his wrist can rotate all the way around, but also it arcs inwards and outwards as well, which is fantastic. Now he's also got some articulation in his abdomen here, so of course he can swivel from side to side, he can arc from left to right, and he can bend forwards and backwards as well, which is really very, very solid. He's got hinged hips, so his legs do kick out to the side there, which is brilliant, and of course they kick all the way forwards and all the way back as well, which is brilliant. He's got double jointed knees, so of course his legs can kick right up to his back there, and he does have articulation in the foot. It's hindered a little bit by those rubber boots there, so you can't really make the most of it, but it is there nevertheless. He also comes with a couple of accessories. They haven't really pushed the boat out and given him a lot, but what he does have is his extended staff and the telescopic fold-up version of that weapon, which he uses more as a pistol. It's kind of a shame that he doesn't come with anything else, like any of the actual guns or weapons that he uses regularly in the show, especially as he really, really struggles to hold the folded-up version of this weapon. It's so small, and his grip is poised as if it's to hold a proper gun. So the result is that this tends to fall out of his grip very, very easily, and really you're relying on gravity to hold this in place, so he can't hold it straight on. It's always got to be with his palm facing up, really. Which is it's a real shame. It's definitely a misfire. They really needed to sculpt a specific grip on one of the hands to hold this. But as I alluded to before, I do really like that this weapon fits nice and snugly into his holster there. It looks really very cool when it's done like this, and like I said, it's a nice tight snug fit, which is great. I'm pleased to say that things do radically improve with his staff. When he's got that in hand, this works pretty well. Again, it's far too slim really for his big grip that he's got in his hands there, but this does it is much more supported by having both hands on it, so it doesn't feel like it's going to slip through his grasp quite so easily. And you can do different postures and positions with him with this, and this is much more sturdy and reliable, and looks pretty decent, I have to say, when it's in his hands. So yeah, I'm quite pleased with this one. Next up, I'll take a look at Tier Anasazi, one of the other main leads of the show. And once again, of course, this is taking inspiration from his Season 1 outfit, which isn't something he wore a lot of after that first season, to be honest. But I'm kind of glad they went with this look, because I think this is his most distinctive look, and I think it's pretty cool, certainly in toy form. The head sculpt, once again, pretty decent, I feel, overall. It's definitely caught the likeness of the actor Keith Hamilton Cobb, but it just looks ever so slightly off to me, a little bit too aquiline. I feel like the hair and the beard need to be much darker. They've gone with a sort of a light brown, and clearly that needed to be black. But overall, I think they've done a pretty decent job with this. Once again, I feel like they've gone to town with all the different textures, materials and details they've managed to pull out for this figure, which is absolutely fantastic. His mesh shirt is a light cotton, he's got these leather gauntlets, he's actually got the extended, I forget what they're called, like claws, I suppose, on his arms, which always looked a little bit silly to me in the show, but nevertheless, he's got him here, which is really cool. And again, it's just little details on the buckles and the little insignia that's going on his belt there, which just looks really very, very nice. He also has a harness with a holster on either side of his leg where he can place his gun, and there's nice little details there, like the silver star is nicely done, and yeah, overall this looks pretty decent. His boots again are a soft rubber, and we can see those little spikes there. They're also obviously a very soft rubber and quite malleable. So, you know, I think again they're nicely painted. I think they've made a good effort here, which, you know, these boots do remind me very much of what the Klingons wear in Star Trek. The rubber definitely isn't fantastic, but, you know, nevertheless, I think it creates an impression, and I think they've done a decent job with it. Now, his trench coat is a faux leather, but they've done a really good job with this. Like, again, it has a really nice texture to it, it catches the light nicely, and it looks really authentic, so I think they've done a really good job of tailoring this. It fits him very, very nicely, and I like that there's little details, the little buttons at the back there, so if you wanted, you could loop through some string, I suppose, and tighten them up. I guess that's what they're there for, but it's just a nice little touch, a little detail from the costume that they've ported over to the figure, which is cool. Now, I am going to run through the articulation again because it's quite different on this figure in a few key places. First of all, whilst he's got the ball jointed neck and he's got that swivel at the neck there, the hairpiece is a solid plastic piece, so this does radically hinder the articulation. Now, it is fairly flexible in that you can move it about, but honestly, if you're going to want to turn his head, you're going to have to persevere quite a bit, and I suggest taking the morning off work if you want to put him in a slightly different position, because it's quite painful to do, to be honest, and probably not worth it after all that. So yeah, definitely something to be aware of. Now, the biggest oddity about this figure is the fact that you'll notice that he doesn't have plastic arms. He's got rubber arms with those telltale horrible pinpricks in the arms there, which just look awful. So these are bendy arms, so there's a wire in there, and yeah, you have to bend them. I think this is because they're experimenting and trying to create a more realistic look for the character, which is pretty cool, because obviously this is a big dude in real life. He's got huge muscles, and I appreciate them taking the effort to do this, but it looks, well, pretty bad. And it's a real shame because I feel like it really lets this figure down massively, which is so disappointing. The other key thing he's missing is the ab articulation that the Dylan Hunt had. He doesn't have that. He's just got a straight swivel at the waist, but nothing in the ab area. If I was a betting man, I'd say they're applying the same logic, and that they thought, well, if you take the trench coats off, then you don't want to ruin the look of his torso there with a joint. So yeah, but this was not a good compromise to make, in my opinion. The rest of the figure is fine. He's got obviously the hinge hips there, which kick out, they kick forward, they kick all the way back, and of course he's got the double jointed knees as well, which is fantastic. Once again, he does have articulation in his foot, but the rubber boot there isn't going to allow it really, so fairly redundant. Now, here's a curious thing. For accessories, he just comes with this pistol, which is very nicely sculpted, it's quite nicely painted in places, it's a pretty decent prop, but I don't know whether it's just me, but I've only come with the one. I've only got one of these pistols. Why is that strange? Well, he has two holsters, and his hands are sculpted as if he's supposed to hold two, so I'm not quite sure what happened here. But despite having rubber hands, he actually holds this weapon perfectly, to be honest. He has no issues holding it in his grip, there's no danger of it falling out of his hand or anything, and it looks really good. His finger goes onto the trigger as well, which is brilliant. So whilst I personally really hate the rubber arms, it actually doesn't compromise the holding of the weapon, which is brilliant. And as we've seen, obviously the gun fits nice and easily into his holster there, and it looks pretty cool once it's in place. It's nice and snug, and yeah, you seem you've got a choice. You can put it in either holster because one's always going to be empty. Now, as I said at the top of the video, they released a total of 4 figures in this line. Now, sadly, I didn't get the others in this line. They've become kind of tricky to pick up over the years, so whilst I'm always on the lookout, sadly, it hasn't happened for me just yet. So as a result, I can't really review or give any detailed thoughts on the other figures, the Rev Bem or the Becca Valentine figures. All I can say is that the Rev Bem looks like, obviously he's more like a soft toy. I suspect he's probably got wires inside. He's got like a wire frame that you'd bend his arms and legs into position. That's my suspicion. I can't confirm it, but that's what it looks like to me. And I have to admit, I've always been slightly hesitant about picking this figure up because he does look really grotesque. But yeah, nevertheless, I do want him to complete the set, obviously. And the Becca looks pretty cool. Again, it's very difficult to tell from photographs, but I suspect this has the articulation that we've seen in the Dylan Hunt figure, maybe a little bit slimmed down. But it looks really fun. So again, that's one I'd love to get my hands on, but sadly haven't as yet. And so there we have it. There is my overview of the Andromeda figures. Overall, I have to say, I think this line is actually pretty impressive for its day and age. There's a lot of attention to detail in the costuming, a lot of different textures. I think the sculpts are pretty decent, and the paint apps are nicely done. The accessories are a little bit on the slim pickings side. That said, what we do have is authentic. They seem to have really captured what we see in the show, and each one is unique to that character, which is pretty cool. And overall, I'm just really impressed with the articulation and the style of these figures. I think they've done a really nice job of presenting them, and yeah, there's loads of fun to be had with these characters. If I had a criticism though, obviously when it comes to Tyr, I hate those bendy arms. I think it was such a misfire, which is a real shame. Likewise, for Dylan Hunt, then obviously not being able to hold his phaser pistol is a real mistake. And I do think there's definitely a sense that these characters, these figures, they aren't as big as their on-screen counterparts. I mean, both of these actors are very, big dudes. And the figures just look a little bit too slimline. And the tailoring, whilst the costumes are brilliant, the tailoring isn't as tight as it should be. It looks a little bit loose in places, which is a shame. But having said all of that, I do think they're actually a real gem actually in the collection, a real surprise, a hidden gem, because they're really fun. They're much better than I thought they were going to be for a brand of toys that I've never really heard of before. And I think it's fantastic to actually have a line of 12-inch figures to support a show that has very, very little support really when it comes to merchandising and figure lines. So I think it's wonderful to have these. And if you're a fan of the show, then these are a must-buy. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.